Thanks for joining us here for one of our early in the year webinars done by Savant Wealth Management. My name's Chris Ruedi. I'm a financial advisor in our Bloomington, Illinois location. Big welcome to everyone. Happy New Year. Hope your year is off to a good start. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really want to make this as informative as we can for all the folks who've chosen to attend. We know your day is busy, so taking 35, 40 minutes with us to talk about a topic like retirement, we know is top of mind for so many people. Close to 10,000 people a day retiring in that baby boomer generation. And our goal with the discussion today is just to try to give you a little bit of information on what we do in terms of looking at the retirement process, maybe some things that you can take away from after we go through here. Retirement is something that we know is so different for everyone. The years of, hey, I did my 30 to 35 years in a career, I got my gold watch, and now I'm off to the golf course or the beach, still applies to some, but it looks a lot different for everyone. So, the goal of today's discussion is to really give you some things to think about, some things to consider that we think are important when making a decision as important as retirement. My partner today, my colleague, Brad Stewart from Freeport office, is going to be, doing this with us today. So Brad, thanks for being here. Any notes of welcome from you?
Thanks for the introduction, Chris, and welcome everybody who's tuning in today. Happy to be here.
So for today's discussion, some of the main points that we want to hit on, we'll talk a little bit about Social Security, obviously Medicare, health insurance, so important when considering retirement, knowing your numbers. We will talk about planning, some of the things to think about when you're taking on such an important decision as, possibly retiring this year. Optimizing your investments, again, we could spend a whole webinar on just optimizing investments and some techniques. So we'll try to hit on some high points, maybe highlight one or two things that we see, that we talk about in conversations quite frequently, and then really kind of rounding out the discussion with the non-financial side of retirement, which is so important, which we can't overlook. Our mental well-being, our physical health, and how that does play a part in a successful retirement. So talking about Social Security first, not necessarily the most important of the topics we're going to talk about today, not the least, just kind of the first one up, because it is something that I think so many of us will be eligible for, and one that we tend to get a lot of questions on during conversations that we have. And, I will just add, the one question I get a lot is, will Social Security be around? Will I still have it? For anybody who's attending today, who's, thinking about retiring this year or in the next few years, I don't think that the system is going to be upended, be changed in any real material way that it would truly impact your benefits. For folks like Brad and myself, the year in which we can claim it, may change as a way to keep the system more sustainable. But that's a farther conversation. We're talking about folks who are considering retirement this year, and so I would just start with that. I do believe the system is going to be there. Now, getting into what would someone think about when they're possibly deciding to take Social Security? What age is where we always start. Where do we begin to take Social Security? Earliest that anyone can take it now is age 62. I think a lot of people are aware of that. You can delay all the way out to age 70, and there's a lot of different considerations and changes depending on what age that you claim at. If you take it at 62 or something earlier than what Social Security defines as your full retirement age, which for most people these days, that's somewhere between 66 and 67. If you take it before those ages, you're going to take a permanent reduction in your benefit. So if your full retirement age is 67 and you decide to start taking as early as you can at age 62, what that equates to is almost a 30% permanent reduction than had you waited till that full retirement age. For some people that makes a difference, and it's really more about does that income need to be replaced? Are you fully retired at 62? Have you had a job change where you need to pick up some incremental income? So many considerations go into what age that someone might choose, but those are the ranges. Early as 62, as late as age 70. Now, there are some benefits of delaying. One, if you are still working, usually we don't see a lot of instances where someone is still employed, still working, earning an income, that adding Social Security, is a material difference. There are some things that you need to be aware of in terms of income limitations. If you take Social Security before that full retirement age as defined by Social Security Administration, there are some pretty severe limits on how much additional income you can earn. And if you go over and above that amount, you do get some of your Social Security benefit held back. So, if you're still working, I would say, consider delaying is probably a good thing to do. Each year that you delay from when you become first eligible at age 62 up to that full retirement age, add somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8% of additional benefit that you'll qualify for up to that full age. If your full retirement age is age 67 and you choose to delay it beyond that, each year you delay, you get an 8% increase. So, as you can imagine, the longer you wait, the more meaningful, the more sizable that benefit becomes. Now, the things to consider are your health, your life expectancy, and if we all knew how long we were going to live, that would make the Social Security claiming decision a lot easier. But there are calculators out there that kind of tell you, well, if you delay and you live till X age, that this is the right way to do it is to delay. The only thing I would say is we are living longer as a population. Now, each of us, our own individual circumstances are different. Our life expectancies are unique to ourselves, but we are living longer as a population. So the idea of delaying, I think it could be appealing to a lot of folks. Cost of living adjustments. Each year that you are on Social Security, the administration makes a determination on how to increase your benefit because of things like cost of living. We've just come out of a pandemic. Over the last 2-3 years. We've seen inflation become a really persistent and prevalent thing. Costs are really going up across the board. And so Social Security adjusts your benefit accordingly. For 2024, the increase is about 3.2% compared to what you were getting last year. In 2023, that number was 8.7%. And again, owing to the really high inflation that we saw in 2022. Previously, though, it's been much lower. Those cost of living adjustments in I'll say, pre-pandemic, the 5 to 10 years leading up to that, it's more modest. Somewhere, some years as low as 0, other years in the 1% and 2% range. So understand you will get a little bit of additional benefit if we have higher increased costs. But if you talk to anybody that's on Social Security, they'll tell you a lot of times that increase in costs is eaten away by maybe some increase in healthcare premiums. But I know Brad's going to touch on that, so I won't steal too much of his thunder. Other strategies that you might want to consider, when claiming Social Security, a lot of the loopholes that allowed us to do a little bit more strategic planning with Social Security were closed some time ago, back in 2016, due to some legislative changes. But the one that's still out there, should anyone need or want to utilize it, is what's called a suspended benefit. If you elect to take Social Security prior to full retirement age and then reach full retirement age and determine, well, I've got other income, my expenses, my costs aren't what I projected them to be, there is a way where you can, quote, suspend your benefit, stop taking that Social Security payment each month and delay it for a period of time, resuming at a later date and getting a little bit of an increased payout then at an advanced age. There are some nuances to it. It's probably one that's done on more of a one-on-one conversation with your advisor or someone with the administration. If you call in and choose to ask them some questions, but just know that is out there. Other things that impact Social Security claiming decisions, spousal benefits. If you're married as a spouse, you would be potentially eligible to claim on your spouse's record at a reduced rate. And so it really just depends. For Social Security, you qualify for the highest benefit that you get, whether that's on your own working record or through your spouse. And those are, again, things that Social Security Administration would tell you which one would give you the higher benefit. Ex-spouses have some claiming rights to former spouses' Social Security record. Again, there's some criteria that you need to meet there. And then survivor benefits. If you lose a spouse and they had a higher Social Security benefit than you do, you are entitled to their higher benefit as a survivor. Many other things to think about with Social Security, but those are the ones we get questions on the most, the ones that I would suggest people consider. And again, as we go through this, Social Security is just one part of many times what is a larger plan. Studies have shown Social Security might replace something in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% of someone's income in their working years. And obviously, depending on what the level of income you made, the replacement amount of Social Security could vary as a percentage. But we do see, thinking about it as a third to maybe 40% of what you were earning during work would be replaced by Social Security. So, Brad, with that, I don't know if you've got anything to add for Social Security, but I know what goes hand in hand with that. Medicare, health insurance, maybe take a little bit of time and touch on that topic if you would.
Yep, absolutely. And as Chris mentioned earlier, similar to, some of the other topics in this presentation, Medicare and health insurance and retirement are subjects we could spend an entire presentation on, right? Today, I'll try to hit the high points and leave you all with some food for thought. And we welcome any questions that you'd like us to address specifically in the Q&A. But as we're working with people and having conversations with friends, family, and others, a big question that comes up when folks are preparing for retirement is, if I'm not Medicare age, what are my healthcare options? Will I be able to afford healthcare if I retire before age 65? And when I do qualify for Medicare, how does it work? There's original Medicare, there's Medicare Advantage plans, there's different times where you can sign up for Medicare. So with that, I think Chris, on the next slide, we'll jump into some specifics, starting with Medicare. So age 65 is a big milestone because that's when we all become Medicare eligible, assuming we've worked and paid Medicare taxes for 10 years. And we all have the same initial enrollment period, right? It starts 3 months before the month we turn 65 and then extends for another 3 months after that. And the Medicare system to work needs healthy people paying premiums, right? So it's really important if you are signing up for Medicare not to miss this initial enrollment period, because you could find yourself, if you miss it and have to enroll at a later time and you didn't have creditable health insurance coverage during that time where you were without Medicare benefits, you could find yourself in a lifetime penalty situation that could have a negative impact on your overall financial plan. So that's if you are somebody without coverage who would sign up for Medicare at age 65. Make sure you know that initial enrollment period. Let's say you're somebody who decides to work past age 65. I'd encourage you to talk to your benefits coordinator at work to make sure that your employer group health plan is considered creditable coverage, and do maybe a cost benefit analysis of Medicare versus your employer plan. But you can decline Medicare coverage at age 65 and delay until you decide to retire and exit that group plan. And in that case, once group coverage ends, enroll in Medicare. You qualify in that circumstance for a special enrollment period after age 65. So it's important to, before you make that decision, talk with your benefits coordinator and make sure that that your employer plan is considered creditable coverage. Another question that we get from people often is, should I, sign up for original Medicare with supplemental insurance, or should I do something like an Advantage plan? So take a few minutes to talk about the differences there. Original Medicare, Part A, which is generally premium free, covers your inpatient hospital care, hospice, skilled nursing facilities for a period of time. Part B, which is your typically outpatient care, doctor visits, preventive care. Everybody pays a base monthly premium for Part B, and then Part D, which is a separate drug plan. Now, those three pieces to Medicare do not cover things like dental, vision, hearing, and there are out-of-pocket costs associated with Medicare. And in that case, that's where people go and buy additional supplemental insurance. Okay. And that plan, original Medicare with a supplement, most facilities, across the US cover, offer or cover Medicare. The alternative to that would be something like an Advantage plan, which is offered through, a private insurer, for example. A lot of people that we talk to, go, let's say, south for the winter, or they, have two homes in two different areas. It's important to know how your Advantage plan works. Make sure that, they don't often travel very well. So with original Medicare, while you could be covered at, any facility potentially across the US, an Advantage plan might not travel well, and you might be restricted to the network in your area. And should something happen while you're out of network, could lead to some catastrophic out-of-pocket costs if, you end up with an emergency or something like that. So kind of work with a licensed agent when you're signing up for Medicare, and know, if you're thinking Advantage versus original Medicare with supplemental coverage, know the differences of both in your area. The next thing I want to touch on is IRMA. So this is a big topic, income related monthly adjustment amount. So spend a few minutes talking a little bit about first how it works. So when you sign up for Medicare, original Medicare, for example, Part A is premium free, typically. Part B, everybody pays a base premium for, which in 2024 on the screen here is that $174.70 per month. And then an additional premium for a drug policy. But let's say that you're you're a high income earner. So each year when you get a letter that tells you what your health insurance premiums for Medicare are going to be, what the Social Security Administration is doing is using a 2-year look back at your tax return from 2 previous years to see what your modified adjusted gross income was. So for people heading into 2024, the Social Security Administration looked at that 22 tax return to decide, do we add an amount to the base monthly premium that you pay for coverage in the coming year. So that first tier up, so let's say you filed a joint tax return in 2022 and modified adjusted gross income was $206,001. You would pay the base premium plus $69.90 every month while you have coverage for the next 12 months. And as income goes higher and higher, you can see that those premiums add up to a substantial amount the more income that you have. Now, this 2-year look back is something that the Social Security Administration does every year. 1 year of IRMA does not mean IRMA forever, right? And as you're getting ready for retirement and you have income from work, sure, it's not uncommon for you to have high income years before heading into retirement. And then, once you are retired and you're able to, maybe, use different investment buckets to control income, whatever the situation is. Maybe you're in a situation going forward where you won't have IRMA. You could, in that situation, because you had a life-changing event like retirement, apply for some assistance to have your or apply for some IRMA relief and have your premiums adjusted based on what you expect your income to be this year and the next few years going forward. So it's important to talk to your advisor if you are in a situation that might qualify for IRMA relief. I also want to mention too, when you retire, some things that we're coming up against now are, with as the IRS has pushed that RMD age from 70 and a half just a few years ago to 72, now 73 to 75, depending on your birthday. RMDs, that first year where you have to take a distribution from a pre-tax retirement account, might be a little bit inflated because your accounts have had a few more years to grow. That additional income on your tax return could increase your income into a situation where now you do have IRMA. So when you're going through your financial plan, there are strategies out there to maybe help smooth out those RMDs over time, or at the very least, just looking at what the impacts on IRMA could be depending on, your whatever your situation is. So that way, at least there aren't any surprises. Chris, is there anything else on IRMA that comes to top of mind? I know it's every year we're going through tax planning strategies. That's a big focus.
It's one I'm glad you hit on, because I think for so many people, may not be aware that it is slightly income adjusted. And for those out there, a lot of people call it a tax because that's what it feels like. If you continue to have substantial income sources through retirement, just know, your Medicare costs will be adjusted accordingly. And I think your point's a great one. If we have that longer runway, maybe someone's retiring early to mid 60s, now having that additional time, if they don't need to draw from things like IRA money that is otherwise taxable, looking for strategies to reduce those required minimum distributions before they kick in. Otherwise, just making sure you're prepared for, potentially being in a different situation post 73 and beyond of, well, now, in addition to other living costs that have gone up, I'm going to have to account for this higher Medicare premium on a go forward basis, because those required minimum distributions do get a little bit bigger by percentage each year that we age. So no, I'm really glad you hit on that. But I think otherwise we're good to maybe go on to some health insurance considerations.
Yeah. Yep. That was that was Medicare for folks who are 65 and older. Let's say you retire before 65. There are options for coverage. Typically a little bit more expensive than Medicare unless you're in a high IRMA situation. So on the screen here, let's walk through what some of those options are, starting with COBRA. Most employers offer retirees the same healthcare coverage that they had while they're working without paying the premiums for the employee. So while you're on group coverage, a lot of times your premium for that coverage is covered by your employer. With COBRA, you can continue that coverage, but you're responsible for the full premium. And that can be for you. It can also be for your spouse. Now, COBRA coverage typically lasts 18 months post-employment. So if you're somebody who retires, at 63 and a half, you could elect COBRA coverage, which would bridge the gap before getting to Medicare. And the nice thing about COBRA is it's the same coverage, it's the same policy, the same network that you're used to, which could be a benefit. But it's important to know what those COBRA premiums are and what the impact's going to be on your budget before getting to Medicare. And typically COBRA covers, an 18-month gap. But let's say you're somebody who decides to work past age 65, and you have a younger spouse. There's an exception to that rule where, your spouse may be eligible for coverage, even though you're eligible for Medicare. Your spouse may be able to stay on the group health insurance plan through COBRA for longer than 18 months, potentially up to 36 months, depending on how long after age 65 you retire. So that's another thing to consider. And again, talking with your benefits coordinator as you're gearing up for retirement could help you get an understanding of how Cobra will work with your plan. Now, oftentimes, if unless spouses retire at the same time, jumping onto a spouse's health insurance plan is a good option. Affordable Care Act health insurance. So going and purchasing a policy through one of the state through your state exchange is a an option that a lot of people should consider. There's different types of policies on the exchange. Some have high deductible, low premium, and vice versa, low deductible, high premium. There's different options out there, and you can work with a licensed agent to kind of look at the benefits and the costs. Depending on what your income is in retirement, you may be eligible for assistance from the government through premium tax credits to help offset those costs. And as we're going through planning with people, it's kind of strategizing and looking at your different buckets of assets and trying to figure out how you might be able to control income to qualify for those premium tax credits is a strategy that we're talking about pretty often. If you worked for an employer, or if your employer was a union who has a retiree health plan, that's often a nice benefit to help bridge the gap before Medicare. A part-time job with health insurance benefits can really help bolster a plan and make it a little bit stronger rather than stopping employment and taking Cobra or Affordable Care Act. Maybe there's a transition period where you still qualify for health insurance. But I want to spend a few minutes here talking about health savings accounts and how you can use them to help answer the insurance planning question. If you're on a high deductible health plan that has the ability to fund a health savings account, you can use those health savings accounts to pay for things like Cobra premiums, pay for out-of-pocket costs, pay for your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. So if you have a health savings account, not only can they be used to cover those expenses in retirement, but there's triple tax benefits. Health saving contributions are tax deductible, growth in the health savings accounts are tax free, and then distributions for qualified healthcare expenses are tax free in retirement as well. So it should not be missed if that's an opportunity that you have, making those contributions every year if you can.
I like it, Brad. That's a good overview of what's out there and available. Health insurance is something that's so important to anyone at any age, but especially as a retiree, knowing what's out there, knowing where to look. And I think, again, it all goes back to we advocate for being prepared for retirement. And so a lot of these things you can get information on before you have to make that decision and know what's out there and what can be best for you. So I appreciate you going through that. Social Security, Medicare, health insurance related questions. So many of those are brought to us on a daily basis with conversations that we're having. So hopefully there were some takeaways for folks who have joined us today and maybe spurred some thoughts. And again, please feel free to send over any questions that you have in our chat box. We will get to them at the end of the presentation. Switching gears a little bit, knowing your numbers, and when I think about retirement, when we talk about all the things that you consider, I think of retirement like any other major decision that we make, whether that's a purchase, whether that's a job change, whether, that's a life change, lifestyle change. You don't want to go into something as important as this without having a plan. You don't go on a trip without a plan. We're going to be in many instances in retirement for as long, if not longer, in some cases than what our working career was. So knowing your numbers, having that plan, I think is always is an important place to start. And again, better to do it beforehand. But if if retirement's coming upon you, or if it's maybe forced upon you, it's never too late to start. And if you're at all concerned that maybe you're recently retired and you haven't gone through some of these exercises, again, it's never too late. So when we talk about making a plan, Again, that embodies a lot of things, what we need, what we want, maybe what we wish for. We work so long and maybe under a routine that we've got these, major goals for retirement, whether that's travel, spend time with family, maybe work, do service related work. And so all of that goes into these determinations. But I think the biggest thing I always start with is expenses, and it's not necessarily just what it requires to pay for utilities, pay for a mortgage if it's still remaining, rent, all those things. You have to have a baseline, know what you spend on an after-tax basis monthly, but then also when you go into retirement, what changes would you like to see? Would you like to consume more? Are there things that you want to pursue now that you haven't been able to, without honing in at least on a starting point for that number? And again, we're going to get down to why you want to be flexible, because especially early on in retirement, things change. We have to have a starting point for our plan to be able to give any type of viable prediction on how the course of retirement might play out. You have to know what you want to consume and what form that will take. Will spending change, go up or down when you retire? And you can do a range. And the beauty is, and Brad will get into this, there are softwares out there. There are planning capabilities that you can say, well, show me what it looks like at $5,000 a month of after-tax consumption. How long or how stable does that project out to be? What if we bump that up to 7,000 because we're going to live in a more expensive place, or we want to take on more consumption? You can change all these things on the fly or on regular meetings and update that as markets go up and down to help you make those decisions on goal prioritization. Maybe something that started off as being very important has to come to the back because something else becomes a bigger priority. So just having a place to start with expenses. Obviously, we've talked a lot about income sources already. Just as a reminder, those would be things like Social Security, pensions that you may be eligible for, any properties, rental income. If you're agriculturally inclined, you own land that gives you some type of farm-related income, and then what you can draw on from your investments, whether that's pre-tax 401k that you had been saving in, possibly things you could draw from Roth IRA or just traditional savings, brokerage type of investment accounts. Thinking about taxes, knowing what tax bracket, and I'm glad Brad alluded to that. Oftentimes, depending on how someone chooses to save for retirement during their working career, they may build up a different balance in things that are taxable later on in life, things that you pay tax on now and it grows tax-free into the future, or things that you pay tax along the way as you go. If you have those different sources, can try to structure what your tax rate really will be, and especially if we're trying to stay under things like IRMA, if it's Medicare related, Medicare surcharge, if you're still in a really high income position, or if we want to just look at potential Roth IRA conversions. I know we'll talk about that. Different ways you can manage your tax structure. Understanding where you live, what you're going to be taxed on. In Illinois, we get a lot of gripe where we are about the high rate of some taxes. The one thing Illinois doesn't tax is retirement income benefits. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about relocating during retirement, that depending on where you're going, will they tax your income differently than maybe where you earned the money? And lastly, before I turn it over to Brad, being flexible. I think I can't stress that enough, how important that is, because whether out of necessity or out of desire, something is going to change. The one thing we know when we start a plan and we look and try to project out over possibly a 10, 20, 30-year retirement is that there are things that we cannot just account for along the way, that we have to be willing to adapt, whether that's health related, helping a family member, relocation. So just, making sure that we're flexible because retirement's a big change. And, often we see spending kind of go up in those first few years of retirement. Kind of folks get the taste of, hey, I've got some freedom. Now I'm going to use that time and maybe some additional expense that goes with that. until you settle into a pattern of, maybe what a more normal day-to-day is going to be for you on a go-forward basis. Obviously, we know market returns are variable. Just going through the last couple of years, you've seen it all, and we know we can't control market performance, but if we plan for these other considerations, there are some things that we can do to try to help insulate some of that short-term volatility that the markets provide. Brad, I'll let you speak to some of the reports we have here. I know it's a busier slide, and we try to keep the content to something real visible for all of our webinar attendees. But I think it's so important to see what some outputs are for some of that software I was talking about on how we really take, okay, hey, this all sounds good. Well, let's stress test it. Let's use technology to help us give us more certainty, or at least more probability of success during a retirement period. So, maybe take a couple of minutes and touch on what we've got up here and how we utilize them in those conversations we have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is a pretty intimidating slide. But no, it's a good example of, as time goes on and technology gets better and better. I mean, we have a lot of great tools to stress test the plan and look at what it means to, like, be flexible, like you said. On the left is an output from software that we use called Money Guide Pro, where we can do what's called a Monte Carlo analysis on a financial plan. So like you said, Chris, when we're, discussing what a monthly budget looks like, whether you want to spend $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 more or less per month, and what if you wanted to purchase a second home, or purchase that RV and travel for a few years? How much do you want to account for potential long-term care expenses down the road? That software on the left side of the screen lets us look at that kind of cash flow and expense plan, what your income sources and assets are today, and then draw that out over the next, often today we're looking at 30 plus year time horizons, to see what's the probability that your portfolio outlives you. In this particular case, out of 1,000 different scenarios, there's an 87% probability. And when we're going through that exercise, I mean, we make different assumptions to stress test the plan, like you said. What if inflation is higher for longer? What if returns are not as much as we might expect that they could be, depending on your asset allocation? Looking at inflation, risk, and return, and different long-term fundamentals like that is something that we can do with the software that we have, to give you a level of comfort that you can retire when you want to, or if you have some progress to make before you make that decision to leave the workforce. On the right side of the screen, I know you mentioned, Chris, Roth conversions, and we now have a tax planning tool called Holistiplan, which can give us really good, detailed information on the impact of different planning strategies and how they're going to look on your tax return at the end of the year. So, for example, if you're somebody who's looking at down the road, really, really large RMDs, you have accumulated your retirement assets and pre-tax accounts. Your lifestyle is going to be covered by other income sources like Social Security, maybe part-time work, maybe pension income, and things like that. But then you're looking at RMDs that could push you in a higher tax bracket when you don't really need the income. One thing we can use this software to look at is, what if we do Roth conversion planning to fill up your lower tax brackets, pull money out of your pre-tax accounts at a lower effective tax rate than you'll have down the road? And how does that look over the long term? Is that adding after-tax value to your financial plan? And that's just one example of how we can use that software. Another opportunity for that could be, if you're going to have a high income year, what are some opportunities to itemize deductions? How can we maybe go about charitable planning and things like that? So, two good examples of how we can use software to optimize your plan and not look at things in a short-term bubble.
Yeah, I think it leads us into the kind of the fourth main topic we wanted to hit on today, and we call it optimizing your investments. And that can take on a lot of forms, whether that's a technical approach, an investing approach, maybe just some good housekeeping things to consider. But you have to have that plan first. And so that's why we kind of structured the presentation. We can't know how to operate within the context of your plan or to give you good quality, valuable advice towards your portfolio unless you have that bigger plan first fleshed out, what we know we're trying to achieve, kind of looking at some of those different areas. So optimizing your investments, again, can kind of take a lot of forms. Consolidating your investments, that's one, maybe I'll take a minute on to touch on, because in so many conversations that we have, what should I do with my previous company's 401k, the retirement plan that I was in? Maybe you've worked for multiple employers over the course of your working career. Making sure that you don't leave an account behind somewhere that could be overlooked, whether that's because you may owe, or you may have to take a required minimum distribution out of it in the future. Maybe it's something that you want to rely on as an income source when you take retirement, or just to make sure that we don't overlook rebalancing or investing accordingly to your plan. Sometimes consolidating things that, as long as it's of the same tax nature. So Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks can be combined to one Roth IRA at retirement. 401ks, IRAs, sometimes other forms of retirement accounts that are still subject to income tax can be consolidated into one IRA. And then if you maintain other brokerage accounts, that's more of what we would consider kind of taxed each year, pay as you go. But if you can kind of help simplify your plan, your life, that you don't have to keep track of, multiple places, login, statements, things to go, we find that can be helpful. It can add a little peace of mind to your retirement, so you can focus on other things and you don't have to go around looking for different accounts elsewhere. But it also, I think, one of the things that I get a little bit of pushback on is, well, if I have my money spread out in different places, aren't I more diversified? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, is kind of the short answer. Many times we find that if you do maintain investments at two different places, or if you're looking to advice from maybe multiple sources, maybe one's a self-directed account that you like to use. More often than not, we see actually more concentration than diversification. That's just seems to be the way that it works out. Think of it, if you use multiple doctors, and you want to make sure that you have that pharmacist there that's making sure that there's no harmful interactions for the medicines that you're prescribed, or in our world, we want to make sure that what you have in one account is complementing, not taking away from another account that you have. And so that can be another case for some consolidations on how to optimize. It can reduce cost in some cases by consolidating investments. So something you might want to keep in mind. Asset allocation, that's just your mix of stocks and bonds. A lot of that is largely driven from that planning step that we talked about previously. If we know what overall long-term rate of return that your plan really needs to meet your goals, a lot of times we can back into the appropriate allocation. We talked about tax efficiency a little bit. I know Brad's got some thoughts on that, along with tax buckets we'll get into. And then, the one other thing I would like to add is just this intergenerational planning. We're talking about retirement in 2024. We want to keep that to things that impact someone retiring this year. One of the things that could change in the next coming years is we are set to see some tax law changes. We had some changes in 2017 under former President Trump that are set to expire at the end of 2025. That means our standard deductions are going to go back to what they were previously, so half of what they are now. Some of those gifting limitations are set to go back to those pre-2017 levels. And so just knowing that those changes are out there, and if you're considering retiring this year and you think of your plan not only for maybe you and a spouse, but for your heirs, maybe their heirs and beyond, making sure that you take the time to talk about, well, are there steps, are there gifting strategies that we can use this year or next year in 2025 before these laws potentially change, go back to what they were, in an effort to maximize that outcome, not only for yourselves but for your family. So, Brad, we've got a slide here which is showing some buckets, and we've kind of talked about that along the way: taxable, pre-tax, Roth, but kind of that next step after we determine what the appropriate mix of investments is for someone's plan. One of the ways we can optimize is actually taking each of those different kinds of investments and maybe utilizing them in these different types of accounts because of their different tax nature, and with the goal of improving efficiency. And I don't know if you want to kind of touch on each of those three and what we see going into each one.
Yep. Yep. I think this is a big part of a financial plan that can't be overlooked, because in the long run, investment returns and positive investment returns are great, but it's also important to know how much of that you're going to keep for yourself, and knowing, number one, your asset allocation, but how you're going to allocate those different pieces of your portfolio in the different tax buckets can, help improve how much you're keeping after taxes. Trust and taxable accounts are buckets where you pay tax on the income that you receive in dividends and interest as you go. Every year, that income goes on your tax return. And as your assets grow in those buckets, those gains are tax deferred. So a couple advantages for holding things like, stocks in a taxable bucket. Stocks are some of the higher growth asset classes out there. And as long as you aren't selling in that bucket, the gains on those stocks will be tax deferred until you sell. Once you sell, you have a realized gain, but those realized gains are often taxed at lower preferential tax rates, as opposed to something like ordinary income, like Social Security and IRA distributions and things like that. Dividends are also often qualified, and qualified dividends means that that income is receives that lower preferential tax rates as well. Pre-tax qualified accounts, so everything that went into that bucket is tax deferred. You received a deduction, right? Now you're going to pay the taxes when you take the income out of that bucket, dollar for dollar. And if you are growing that bucket the fastest, you are probably generating more income tax liability in the long run than you probably need to. So when we're implementing a portfolio, often the tax nasty, lower growth asset classes go into that pre-tax qualified bucket. The Roth, often a great source for tax-free income. A lot of times one of the last buckets that people will spend. That said, we tend to be pretty aggressive with the Roth bucket and put a lot of high growth potential assets in the Roth, in that Roth bucket. You can't say bucket enough, right? But with a good asset location plan, you can maximize your after-tax return, as opposed to just investing every bucket exactly the same. I mean, being really mindful of what pieces go where in these three buckets is something that I think we do pretty well.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that, and it's something that I think for a lot of people that's harder to do on their own. Without having visibility on all accounts at the same time. You can maintain one level of portfolio exposure targets, but as you say, allocating each one of these different types of accounts a little bit differently, could bring some added efficiency. I know we're running up, Brad, with the last 10 minutes or so of our presentation, and certainly don't want to minimize this last one, but I do know we have several questions that we want to get to. And really the last thing I think Brad and I wanted to hit on for the attendees today is just knowing that, hey, retirement, we spent so much of this on financial related matters. Yes, that's a key piece of retirement readiness. But I think the other non-financial piece of this can't be overlooked either. And that's just being, ready for that next step psychologically. And that's, sometimes I couch it as not what you're retiring from, but what you're retiring to. What's that lifestyle going to look at? How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to replace possibly that interaction that you had during those working years. And so, whether or not that's, the traditional, hey, I'm going to spend my time, traveling or being on the golf course or living, in a more exotic location. Maybe that's service related. Maybe that's volunteering. Maybe that's still working in some capacity, starting a business to keep yourself busy. Anything that can keep you mentally engaged and physically active is going to be so key in a successful retirement, because if we have our health, we have our mental capacity, those costs for things like long-term care insurance, medical related costs, hopefully would be, less than if we just kind of detached after working. So, I haven't had many conversations that someone said, hey, I've had a successful retirement because I've earned 9% in my IRA. Hey, that's great. We want everyone to have good, successful financial outcomes, but those are all in service to the real tangible goals. I want to be healthy to spend time with my family. I want to conserve my assets because I want to leave something to my heirs. I want to be able to go out and use these resources I've worked so hard to accumulate during my working career to then actually be able to use in retirement without having to be held back by something, physically or medically related. So just keep that in mind. When we think about retirement really being a full picture, there's a lot of fulfillment, a lot of well-being that goes beyond the financial aspect of that. And if you have that part along with a stable finances, we think that's what's really going to lead you to an outcome or to a result that you're going to be most happy with. So before we jump into the questions, in our chat, you'll see there's a link. If anything that we hit on spurred you to want to have a little deeper conversation with Brad or myself or any of the other advisors in our growing organization, you can get on there, sign up, no obligation, but it just gives us an opportunity to touch on something maybe more personal or specific to your situation than we were able to do here in this more general setting. The other thing, would encourage folks to visit savantwealth.com. There will be a spot also in the chat, and you can also sign up on our website. We have a 6-week e-newsletter for retirement preparedness. And so once a week, if you choose to sign up, you're going to get a retirement related email from Savant on a different topic. And we just think it's a unique way for you to get little bits and pieces of things to think about. Many of them we've talked about here this afternoon. Some of them would build on that. So look for the link in our chat and in our Q&A for those, or savantwealth.com. Brad, we've got a lot of questions here, and I know we'll try to get to as many as we can. But maybe I'll pose the first one to you. Can a spouse claim Social Security prior to full retirement age and then move to a spousal benefit when he or she receives full retirement age, if the spousal benefit is larger? Any thoughts on where you would take that?
Sure. So one thing about the spousal benefit, if you claim the benefits on your own record as that spouse, and then plan to take a spousal benefit when, say, the higher earning spouse claims their benefits, your spousal benefit will still be discounted by a certain amount. So it's important to keep that in mind. But what the Social Security Administration will do is, if you sign up for benefits on your own record, when your spouse goes to claim their own benefit, Social Security Administration will look at both benefits. What are you receiving on your own record? What spousal benefit are you eligible for? And you'll receive the higher amount.
Great, thank you. Another question, Medicare related. I believe you must sign up for Part A at age 65, but can decline Part B if you have your employer coverage. Would you let us know if this is correct or not? Yeah, Brad hit on this early on in our section, and what your description there is right. You do need to sign up for Part A, but you can decline coverage for the premium paying Part B if you're covered elsewhere. But just keep in mind that you do then have a window of time that opens up after you're no longer covered by your current insurance that you would need to sign up for Medicare Part B. But good question, good thought.
How about an investment related question for you, Chris? Will your investments and strategy be changed automatically when you retire by Savant?
I tend to say if we've done the planning beforehand, maybe some modest changes at retirement, and that would really be largely more related to what are the level of withdrawals that you're going to take from your portfolio, as opposed to some hard and fast rule that as we get older or as we retire, we need to become more conservative. We can't control what the market gives us on a year-to-year basis. But as we said, we're planning for long-term retirement. And if that's the case, you're going to need your portfolio to continue to grow, not only to keep up, obviously with inflation has been a big topic in the last year and a half. But you need that portfolio to provide some additional growth to supplement things like pension, Social Security. I wouldn't say that we're automatically going to change someone's investment profile, just because they retired. But if we're going to be starting supplemental withdrawals, using the portfolio to supplement income, could make the case that, maybe trying to rein in some of the volatility in the portfolio, or maybe, as you kind of described, in one of those types of accounts, one of those buckets, we might make some adjustments. But I think the mistake made too many times is becoming too conservative too quickly. And so, unless there was a real compelling case for that, it's not something I would say we would do just automatically.
Sure. I can take another Medicare related question. Does Medicare look at taxes every year, and is the premium amount per person or per couple? So yes, every year the Social Security Administration does that 2-year look back to determine if you are or are not subject to IRMA, and the premiums and IRMA are per couple.
Great. Question about, if I think I may need to buy a car and use financing, taking out a loan, is it best to do while I'm still employed rather than wait? Again, I think that's each individual circumstance would be different. But I think the greater point is, how much debt should we carry into retirement? And again, that's largely, to me, dependent on what type of debt is it. Is it high interest credit card debt that can be very hard to overcome? Rates, because of what the Federal Reserve has done over the last year or so, with 11 rate hikes in recent history. Financing for things like cars has gotten more expensive. Doesn't mean that you couldn't or shouldn't do that. But if you were someone who took advantage of refinancing your home mortgage in the pre-pandemic years, or shortly after, when rates got historically low for mortgage, I don't advocate in many cases, if you've got one of those very low mortgage rates, paying off a large sum of outstanding mortgage just to be debt free. If you could use that, use those dollars, otherwise keep them invested, possibly earning more over a longer period of time. It is individual situation, case by case. But if you need a car, I would say get it, because you got to be safe. And whether or not that means you carry a loan into retirement, I think if you have a conversation about, well, how would I continue to pay for that if I don't have a paycheck coming in, and it can cash flow, then I wouldn't be as hung up on carrying a car note into retirement. But it's all about what your sustainable cash flow could be, and if you're going to have a big drop in income as a result of retirement, maybe taking that on, at least for that first car. You're probably gonna need a few cars in retirement, but at least for that first car into retirement, maybe doing that while still working. Brad, one more maybe we'll hit, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up. But for the tax rates that are reverting in 2026 back to the pre-2017 levels, you want to talk about the itemized deductions, property taxes. Would someone's situation be better off, worse off, if some of those personal exemptions come back? What are some of the changes? I think maybe more generally, someone might look at before these tax law changes are set to roll back at the end of 2025.
Sure. I think looking at itemized deductions, it used to be a lot easier to itemize before a few of those changes were put in place. One, the doubling of the standard deduction. Two, I think the state and local $10,000 tax cap really put a limit on what people could itemize going forward. So there's speculation out there on how this will be rolled out, but potentially with a lower standard deduction and removal of that cap, if that happens, might give people an opportunity to itemize more than they can today. That's one of the big changes out there. And I also want to point out too, when those changes go away, just that tax rates are set to increase as well. So the rates that you're paying today are lower. Those rates will go up, but those brackets may get narrower. So more or less income into higher higher brackets with higher rates could be a significant impact on your tax return.
Great, great. Well, hey, Brad, I appreciate you taking some time to join me this afternoon. This hour's gone by much quicker than I think both of us anticipated. So we hope folks that are still out there listening with us, if you've got questions in the chat, we will try to get to those, off air here. But really want to, thank you, Brad, for joining us. Everyone out there, we hope you have a good year in 2024. If there's anything that we can do to help guide your retirement choices, check out savantwealth.com. Reach out to Brad or I personally after our webinar today. We're happy to point anyone in the right direction we can, but hope you all have a great rest of your week and a safe and healthy 2024.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, everybody.